Hey, young pros, we are in week 4 of this incredible story, the story of Esther. And here's the big idea for today. If you don't allow God to work through you, He will work around you. If you don't allow God to work through you, He will work around you. So we're looking at this story that takes place around 3,000 years ago. It's a story of real human beings in a real place in real time. It's not a Disney princess story. And it's a story that doesn't just take a few weeks or a few months. It's a story that takes 10 years. Like your story and my story, some of the parts of this don't just happen in a matter of hours. It goes on and on and on, and you wonder, is this ever going to get over? So let me just catch us up to the story. Remember, it starts off as any great story does. Once upon a time in a land far, far away, across the world for you and I, there lived a powerful king, King Xerxes, the king of Persia. And he was showing off his wealth and his power. He throws this party for 6 months, brings it back to the capital city for a week. There's this big party. The wine is flowing. He's drunk. He tells his beautiful wife, Queen Vashti, hey, I want you to come and dance before all of these people with your crown. And she says, no thanks, I'm not going to do that, inciting incident. And so she's banished because these creepy men who are very chauvinistic and sexist say, hey, king, you can't let your woman talk to you that way. How will all the women in the kingdom talk to their men? So he banishes Vashti. And then after a period of time, these same chauvinistic, sexist men come back to the king and say, king, we got a great idea. You need to find another wife. Why don't you go take a beauty contest, get a bunch of virgins, beautiful virgins, bring them back. We'll have a beauty contest. We'll pick your queen. And of course, he's like, great idea. So they do that. Again, not a Disney princess story. This was human trafficking 3,000 years ago. And this beautiful woman named Esther, who's a Jew, but no one knows it yet, is one of the women taken. And it actually says at this point in the story that she was beautiful in form and feature, which at this point in the story seems to be her only asset. But we're going to find out, especially today, that there was so much more to Esther. Well, Esther's uncle who raised her, a guy named Mordecai, is sitting outside of a gate one day, and he overhears this plot to kill the king. And so he sends a message to Esther. Esther relays the message to the king. The king's life is saved. And then we're introduced to a new character, a guy named Haman. And remember, when the Jews read this every year at their festival, Purim, to celebrate the story of Esther, whenever the name Haman is read in the story, they all stomp their feet. They've written the name Haman on the bottom of their shoes, and they stomp their feet and go, boo, because he's the villain of the story. In fact, he's such a villain. Remember, as we saw last week, that Haman has everybody, as he walks into the court, every time he walks in, they're supposed to bow and worship him, but there's this guy named Mordecai who refuses. And they start telling Haman, hey, this Mordecai, he never bows to you, and he's a Jew. So Haman decides he wants not just Mordecai killed, he wants all of them killed. And he says, King Xerxes, listen, they've got these weird customs, and because of the weird customs, because they don't look like us, because they don't talk like us, because they don't act like us, we should just wipe them out. And in fact, Xerxes, I'll foot the bill. And he offered to, in our day and age, would be millions of dollars. But King Xerxes is like, no. Persia's got this bill. Here you go, signet ring, blank check. Do what you need to do. And so an order goes out. In 11 months, every Jew, man, woman, and child will be killed. A genocide. Every man, woman, and child will be killed. So imagine what that was like for those Jewish people for 11 months, knowing what was going to happen. We pick up the story, Esther chapter 4, verse 1. Watch this. When Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. Okay, get the picture. Mordecai is not sitting on some bench in some park in the capital city of Persia with a couple of tears rolling down his eyes. He is tearing his clothes. He's beating the ground. He's wailing, ah! Because he knows. Then in a couple of months, he and every man, woman, and child that is a Jew is going to be killed. Skip down to verse 3 and find that it's not just Mordecai. Look at this. In every province to which the edict and order of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews with fasting and weeping and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. So it's not just Mordecai, it's everybody. And of course they're wailing. Again, you've probably watched movies like Schindler's List or read books. It would be much like the Jews, knowing once they found out when they're loaded into those cars and they're taken to Auschwitz or those other concentration camps, they know what's coming. That's what's happening to these people. No wonder they're wailing and weeping, fasting and praying. Well, let me just summarize verses 4 through 7. One of the eunuchs, one of the people who worked for Esther, she's queen now, remember, tells her what Mordecai is doing, saying, hey, we saw Mordecai on the city. He's weeping and wailing. And she's like, why? So she sends a message to Mordecai. What's going on? Mordecai sends a message back to Esther. I don't know if you know what is going on, what Haman has plotted. And he tells Esther what is about to happen. Now, what takes place in the rest of chapter 4 is what we might call ancient texting. That Mordecai and Esther, so you can almost imagine, as we read this, it's like they're sending text messages back and forth. Now, it was ancient, so it's a little scroll that a eunuch is running to Esther and saying, here, but today it would be like she gets a text and she sends him a text. He gets a text, he sends her back a text. Watch this. Verse 11. All the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares the lives. So she's responding to a text, if you will, that he's already sent to her. And he said, listen, we're all going to die if you don't do something. You need to go talk to the king. She texts back. You know, there's this law. Every country has some strange laws, right? I could give you a list of really strange laws here in America in different places. Here's a strange law, that anybody that goes to the king uninvited, including the queen herself, will be killed. And so she texts him back and she says, I don't know if this is a good idea. Mordecai, do you realize that if I do this, my life is on the line? Mordecai, do you realize that if I go there and he's not happy about me showing up, I'm dead? So look what Esther finishes with in verse 11. The end of verse 11 says, but 30 days have passed since I was called to the king. It's like she sent him a text message, but then she adds this one. The second text message comes just as Mordecai finishes reading it. It says, Mordecai, by the way, the king hasn't asked me in for 30 days. I'm not sure the king wants to see me right now. Otherwise, he would have already asked for me. Apparently, the king is spending time with the rest of his harem. I don't know that it's a good idea for me to go there. And so Mordecai texts back, verse 13, do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. There's no LOL or raffle in this text. He's not rolling on the floor laughing. He's not laughing out loud. He's saying, Esther, don't think just because you're the queen that you're going to escape this edict, because remember, you're a Jew. Now, this is where we're going to see this defining moment. Here's what Mordecai is saying. He's saying, Esther, there's this defining moment that you're in right now. Okay, watch this. Look what happens. Look at verse 14. He goes on, he sends her another text. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish, and who knows but that you have come to your royal position. Oh, you should underline these words, for such a time as this. Couple of things to remember from this story. Number one, remember back when we were first introduced to Esther, all it said about her was Esther was beautiful in form and feature. And at that point, all we think about Esther, the only asset we really see that Esther has is she's smoking hot. That's it. And I told you, oh wait, but there's more to Esther. And we're about to see that. Second thing to remember, she's still undercover. They know that Mordecai's a Jew, But the king and Haman, boo, they don't know she's a Jew yet. Third thing to remember, when she says, I could die, don't just shrug your shoulder and say, nah, she's not going to die. I mean, the king chose her of all the women. Remember Vashti? Remember what he did with Queen Vashti? So she's legitimate in saying, I don't know if this is going to work. Remember this phrase I gave earlier. If you don't allow God to work through you, he will work around you. That's what Mordecai is telling her. He's saying, Esther, listen, I think you need to pay attention that maybe God gave you your beauty, that maybe God set you up as queen so that you could be the one to save your people. But Esther, if you don't want to be used by God, he'll just work around you. Do you notice that in verse 14? It's a defining moment. And then look at verse 16. Go gather together, this is Esther, she texts him back. Go gather together all the Jews who are in Susa. Oh, this is where we get to see Esther for who she was. And fast for me. Don't eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. Esther saying, I don't know if I'm going to live or die. But you're right, Mordecai. I'm not going to pass up this opportunity to be used by God. Fast for 3 days. Fast for 3 days. This is where, remember when I said, all she had in that first chapters where we're introduced to her is her beauty. And here she's putting her trust in God. And we see this heroine, this incredible person. She's saying, listen, if I die, I die. She's saying, burn the ships. Maybe you've read that story before, but we don't know for sure if it's legend or not. But supposedly Cortez bringing his men from Spain and coming over and landing somewhere in Mexico. And they had spent months crossing the ocean, and his men were tired and exhausted. And they land on the beach, and Cortez is telling them, we're going to march inland hundreds of miles, and it's going to be difficult. And he can see the men starting to get discouraged. He can see the shoulders slumping, and so he tells some of his generals, go burn the ships. And supposedly in the story, all the men are standing on the shore, and ships go up in flames. And Cortez was saying, there's no other option now. We burn the ships. And Esther was burning the ships in a sense. She's saying, if I die, I die. But I'm not missing this opportunity. I think for you and I, the question we need to ask ourselves is if you don't allow God to work through you, he will work around you. Is that what you want? For Esther all these years ago, when Mordecai tells her that, she's going, no. For me, burning my ships, my defining moment in my life was when I was in high school, and I had to decide whether this was going to be real for me, whether I was going to really live this out. And I remember I was frustrated. My family had broke up. I was living on my own. I didn't know if I wanted to really do this Jesus thing anymore. And I was heading down to the Drag. Now, where I was from, the town, the Drag, that was where all the high schoolers hung out, and they drank, and they partied, and they'd had sex. And so I'm walking down there, and I'm going, I'm done with all of this. I'm going to go get drunk. I'm going to find a girl. I'm going to have sex. I'm walking away from all this God stuff. And I got partway down there, and I got so frustrated, I started pulling my hair, which is maybe what happened to it, right? And I started pulling some of my hair out, and I was going, ah! It was a defining moment. There was a moment in my life where I burned the ships in the harbor. And I turned around and started going home, and I said, as I'm walking home, I'm going, all right, God, I'm in. I'm all in. I burned the ships in the harbor. Have you ever done that? Have you ever burned the ships yet? And if you haven't, will you? What's your defining moment? What has it been in the past? And will you say yes to God when you find that defining moment in the future? If you don't allow God to work through you, he will work around you. God, what an amazing story this woman named Esther all these years ago, and how amazing that she can motivate us and encourage us all these years later in her story. How amazing that a woman who had such privilege and comfort, all the things that we want in the world, and yet she was willing to give it all up for such a time as this, because she recognized, God, that you will work through her or around her, but you will work. May we be people that say, God, I want you to work through me. I want you to work through me. We love you, Jesus. Amen.